Hello, everybody. Good morning. My name is Stephanie Peterson, and I'm the head of marketing at AfterCollege.com. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on transforming interviews into conversations. I'd like to start by introducing Dr. Courtney Young Law. She is the CEO of Fundamentum. I will introduce her first, and then she will give the presentation, and at the end, we will have some time for Q&A. So if you have any questions, you can see in the GoToWebinar control panel, there is chat functionality. So feel free to type your questions in there. And then at the end of the webinar, we'll pick a few of them and Courtney will address them. So Dr. Courtney Young Law is an educator and coach dedicated to transforming people into protagonists. After years as an administrator and professor in higher education, she founded Fundamentum, a coaching service that teaches you the skills you need to take control of your career and find your fit. She's passionate about helping other people thrive and giving job seekers the personal attention they need to change their career trajectories. Courtney, we'll go ahead and hand it over to you and let you start the presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Stephanie. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today and to chat with all of you. And I am really excited to share with you how to transform interviews into conversations. So, we've all been there. You're in an interview and you get the sweaty palms, you can't speak, your mind's racing and everything's coming up blank. Interviews really can feel like an interrogation, but they're not supposed to. You really want a conversation. And interviews that are conversations are more successful. The goal is to make sure that everyone in the conversation can work well together. So a one-way interrogation doesn't give anyone the information that they need. And when I say conversation, what I really mean is a two-way, authentic interaction where you as the interviewee have practiced and prepared, but not so that you sound rehearsed. You want to sound comfortable and confident. So how do you do that? In this webinar, I'm going to go over how you should prepare for the interview before you go in. We'll practice some common questions and how you can prepare your answers for them. And we'll think about questions that you need to ask so that you get the information that you need. And also review some tips and tricks to shift the power dynamic, right? So that you don't feel uncomfortable or get as flustered as if you feel really confident and ready to go. So as Stephanie introduced me, I'm the CEO of Fundamentum, where we coach people to take control of their career and find their fit. We've been really lucky to partner with AfterCollege and to be able to share some pieces of our coaching program with you. So preparing for an interview. This is absolutely key. And when we talk to hiring managers, the concern that we hear over and over again is that folks weren't prepared, that they weren't ready to come in to talk about themselves or to talk about the company or the position. So what do you need to do to prepare? You have to understand the employer's point of view. And you need to understand and have done the self-reflection to be able to talk about your skills and goals. You have to do some research of the organization and be ready to ask good quality questions so that you can really demonstrate how interested and excited you are about the position. So what is this employer point of view that I'm talking about? In order to crack the code for an interview, you really need to know what the employer is looking for. They want folks who are skilled, who have some passion or excitement about the company or industry. They want folks who are really interested in wanting to do that job that they're interviewing for, or at least can act like they're interested in it, and that they're a fit with the organizational culture. So using this idea of what is the employer point of view is a theme that we're going to come back to over and over again, because when people are asking you a question, it's really important that you start being able to think about what is the employer point of view around this question, and how are they asking, why are they asking, what do they really want to know. So in order for you to be ready to address the employer point of view, you need to assess your skills. You need to catalog your skills so you know what you can do and what you want to learn. And one of the ways to do this might be, if you're thinking about a particular position or particular job interview, is to take the job description and to highlight the skills that you absolutely have, and then to think about the ones where it's a stretch for you. And it's okay that you don't have the entire list of skills. If you did, people would tell you you were overqualified. But you want to be sure that you're well-versed and able to talk about your own skills and how they relate to those that are described in the job description. You also want to understand your goals. You need to know your 5- and 10-year plans. And these absolutely can change, right? Particularly if this is your first job out of college, you're going to learn a lot about where you want to go. But one thing that an employer really wants to see is an ambitious person, and they want someone with initiative. And having goals, whether they change or not, is really an important clue to employers about that. So understanding what you want to do will help you analyze the company and ensure it's a good fit for you. You also need to research the organization. So researching shows interest and respect. You should know the information that is publicly available, or you are demonstrating a lack of interest and a lack of respect. So, read the website, check out the annual report. At Fundamentum, we have an entire framework about how to do research for companies and organizations in depth. But you need to at least do the minimum, because otherwise you're really indicating to them that you're not as interested as you probably are. And you need to know your questions for them. So I'm going to talk a lot more about this later, about what questions to ask. It's a whole section in the presentation. But being prepared with questions is an extension of your research. It's a way for you to signal to the interviewer that you've done your homework and that you have an ability to synthesize and analyze information by the types of questions you're asking. So this is a really critical point, and it's crucial to transforming something into a conversation, because that's where there is real give and take and back and forth, is when you are asking questions of them, particularly if they're good questions that elicit a really dynamic response. So those are the keys to being prepared. The next section that I want to talk a little bit about are, what are the questions that they will ask? So in this section, I'll talk about the different types of questions that you can get in an interview, and then we'll go over some of the common questions that you can expect. So behavioral questions are some of the most common questions that you'll get, and these ask about past experiences to inform the employer how you may behave in the future. You should tell stories to answer behavioral questions. These are the questions that often start, tell me about a time, and ask you to describe a situation. So at Fundamentum, we want you to answer behavioral questions using what we call STARK. And this is a way to organize your story, right? You want to tell people what the situation was, what the task that you were charged to do, what action you took, what the results of that action were, and then most importantly, I think for us, is the K, the knowledge that you took from that experience. So when you craft this story, you really want to describe what happened, what you learned from that experience, and how you can apply this learning to this new role or company. In our coaching program, we have a framework where we, work through stories like this, and we practice these responses for a few weeks to give folks a toolbox of about 10 to 12 stories that they can answer lots of different questions. So, if you wanted to start thinking about how to do this at home, you want to start small by thinking of some of the most amazing experiences or accomplishments that you've had and write them down. And then you can start to translate them into kind of this framework to be able to answer. But the important thing is to think about what are the stories that you want to tell, because that's how humans connect. We connect via stories. And that's how you can really become much more comfortable. You know, you tell stories all the time and talking with your friends and talking with your family. So thinking about how to frame these answers as stories, I think, can be really revolutionary for you in transforming an interview from an interrogation into a conversation. So another type of question are problem-solving questions. And these problems may be real or hypothetical, but they are important ways for an employer to assess your problem-solving ability. They want to understand how you think through a problem. So how do you answer these? So this is a pretty step-by-step approach to answering them, because we think it's really, employers are looking for a very particular response here. They want to see how you think. And so the first thing you want to do is make sure that you understand the question. So you want to restate it in your own words and make sure that you are answering the question that they're really asking. You want to also talk about several approaches that come to mind, and you can be creative here. It's really about sharing what you're thinking. And then you want to select one approach and sort of tell them why, and then talk them through the process that you would use to solve this. So you should think out loud while you're doing this, and that can feel really awkward. So this might be something that you want to practice with a friend or a family member, to sort of practice talking through your thinking process out loud. And you also want to make sure that you ask questions during this, so that if you need any information or if you're confused about something, sometimes people can feel like, oh, I'm supposed to figure this out by myself. But it actually may be that they want to see if you will reach out and ask for help if you need it. So, you know, it may be a bit of a trick question there. So you want to make sure that you're just authentic. And if you're confused about something, that you ask for help, because that's what employers are looking for. They don't want someone who's going to continue to work on something for days and not reach out and ask for help. So this is one of the ways that they measure that. So then there are also skill-based questions. So you may be asked to demonstrate anything, you know, that's considered a hard skill in the interview. So some examples are, you know, technical interviews that focus on coding or Excel skills, doing a timed writing sample, having to do a mock presentation. You know, anything that you have stated as a skill on your resume, it's totally fair game for interviewers to ask you to demonstrate the skill in an interview. So you want to make sure whenever you get a skill-based question or a test or anything, you want to make sure you understand what the interviewer is asking. And again, ask clarifying questions so that you make sure that you're both on the same page about what the actual task is that you need to demonstrate. And then finally, there are motivation questions. And these questions get at the why of your job search. So, you know, why are you leaving? Why are you interested? Your past position. For many of you who are, you know, moving into your first job, that question is very easy. You've graduated and you're you know, excited about your first opportunity for full-time employment. But they will ask other questions about why. You know, why are you interested in this particular role? Why this organization? And you need to be ready for these with honest answers. You know, and framing is very important when you are considering motivation questions. You want to be honest, but you do not have to reveal every detail about, you know, why you're leaving or if you're making a career change. So, you know, obviously many of you have a great answer for why you're leaving, but if you don't, you know, if you have had previous full-time work experience and, you know, your boss was really difficult and that's why you're leaving, you want to frame that answer as positively as possible. So one trick that I like is to focus on the future. So, why are you leaving is, an answer is, I just wasn't inspired anymore. I needed a new challenge. And then go into why this organization or role would provide that challenge, right? You want to be very forward-looking in your framing of these questions. So what I hope that you have heard in my discussion about all of these questions is that practice is really the secret to success. There's no magic formula. You can't predict every question that you might get asked, but preparing and practicing your answers to common questions really does give you an edge. So, I have this visual of Venus and Serena Williams, and they are incredibly talented. And if they walked out on the court, they are likely to be successful. But if they hadn't practiced, they would not have 100 titles between them, right? Like, so even folks who are incredibly talented, gifted orators, need to practice interviewing so that they can learn this new way of speaking. Because remember, your goal is to bring your answer back to the employer point of view. It's not how you normally talk, so you really do have to practice it. So now I'm going to talk about some common interview questions that you are likely to get. I'm going to focus on the employer point of view. So why are they asking this question, and what are they looking to get from you? We'll talk through some typical answers and how to improve them. And I've got some examples of good answers. I'm not going to read through them here. They're here for your reference for later. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them about them. So one of the most popular questions that we hear over and over again is the opener, tell me about yourself. So the employer point of view here is that they really are looking for someone who is self-aware enough to give them a succinct answer about who you are, what you've done, and why this job makes sense in your career path. So a typical answer might be, I'm Pam and I'm a graduate of Loyola University and I want to help people. Well, you really want to expand on that. And, one way to really improve it is to use what we call your personal brand. And so in our coaching program, we help you create, a succinct statement about who you are, what you want, and how you're different from other candidates. And so those are things that you want to be sure that you can articulate and share with people when they ask you to tell me about yourself. You also want to tell them about what you're interested in as it relates to the company or the position. So you don't want to just say, like, I'm super interested in robotics, right? You want to say, I'm super interested in robotics, and I know this is how, it's done here, and that makes me even more excited. So you want to make sure that this answer comes back to the position and the company. So what do you want out of this job? This is another question that is fairly common, and the employer is asking to really understand, they want to understand what you think the job is and how it relates to your goals and career trajectory. So again, this is about knowing your goals, and interviewers really prefer people who are aspirational. So answering this question with what you want to get out of the job in the near term is important, but you also want to connect it to your future goals and aspirations. I think this can be a really important way to differentiate yourself, right? And say, like, I have a longer term plan, and this fits into my longer term plan. Another question is, why are you a good fit for this job? And the employer point of view here is they really want you to make an argument regarding your skills and culture fit. So it's really important that you shift from just sort of talking about your personal traits or, that you really love the organization, you want to be much more methodical in your answer here. And a way to do that is to take a couple of items from the job description that you believe are the most crucial, and then highlight how your work or experience relates to those items. You want to, really emphasize how what you've done already is related to the job and creates a benefit to the organization. And you can see here, there's an example about how to do that. And then I have an example here of a common behavioral question that people may ask that is, excuse me, tell me about a time you had to tell someone they were wrong. So again, employers are really looking for you to demonstrate to them how you did this. They want the details of the story. What was the situation? What were you trying to do? What was at stake? You want to tell them the story so they can understand how you navigated it. And you want to make sure that you tell them what you learned and how you will apply it in the role. So this is something that we spend several weeks on in our coaching program. So don't feel like you need to know how to do this immediately. This is something that is a learned skill and takes time to develop. But these are the types of questions you really want to practice. And you want to practice by thinking about what are those times that stick out to you, where there was conflict or where you really learned something, and start to write those down so that you can translate them into stories to share with employers. So now we're going to shift to what you should ask. And it's your turn, to start asking the employer questions. And they will usually allot a few minutes to you, at the end of the interview to ask questions. And you always have questions. Even if they've answered a lot of things, it's really troubling to an employer if they get to the end and the person doesn't have any questions. And it's not a reflection on the interviewer knows that they couldn't possibly have answered everything if you're truly curious and interested about an organization. And you can really differentiate yourself here by asking good quality questions that engage the interviewer. So what are the questions? I'm going to go through several different questions that you should ask and the different types of questions you should ask. But what's important to remember is that your questions give you good information to have if you get the job, and they can really signal to folks how interested you are, how knowledgeable you are, that you have confidence. They're really a key opportunity for you to differentiate yourself. So the questions that you want to ask fall into sort of three categories. You want to have questions that demonstrate your interest, in the organization or the role, so specific to that kind of dive into the research. You want to have questions about the organization to ensure that they're the right next move for you, so you kind of get a sense for the culture, that you get a sense for if it's going to make sense in your career path. And you want to have questions that are tactical and help clarify misconceptions. And I'll give you examples of sort of all of these different questions. So the question, what are the keys to being successful in this role? This is a very forward-thinking question, and it shows that you want to understand more about the role and how success is measured. You want to take notes on what they say, as this will be really valuable information for you once you start the job. And you also are listening to hear if there are any gaps in what you've already talked about, right? If they start talking about a skill that is being really critical that you haven't talked about with the employer at all, it's absolutely fine to say, after they answer the question, to say, oh, I'm really glad you brought up that skill because I haven't gotten a chance to tell you how I have demonstrated that in my previous role. or my internships. Or so this is sort of a common opportunity for you to really, like I said, engage in that conversation, right? Like once they give you some information, if it makes you think of new information that you want to give them, you can start really having a back and forth. Another good question to kind of get at this same type of information is, what are you looking for in the right candidate? And here, you're listening for skills and culture fit pieces. Do you have them? Have you been clear that you have these attributes? And again, it's absolutely fine to bring them up in that back and forth, so that you can make sure that they get all of the information they need to know what a fabulous and amazing candidate you are. Another question are these questions about the company that piqued your interest while you did your research. So an example might be, I noticed you just acquired X company. How does this affect your mobile strategy, right? Like, so it takes the information that you did during your research and shows another level of understanding about what's happening. And it's, again, and I know I sound like a broken record here, but this is a great opportunity to differentiate yourself. You want to really signal that you've done your research and that you can ask good questions, right? Because that's what they're going to be hiring you to do. They're going to be hiring you to come in and be engaged and be curious and ask good questions. And the more you can signal to them that you're capable of that and that you have experience doing that, the better off you will be. So this question is, after talking to me, do you think I'm a good fit? And this question can feel a little risky, but it's a great way to get more information about where you stand with the interviewer. You don't want to ask everyone, just the hiring manager, and usually at the end of the interviews, at the end of the day. It's important that you don't put them on the defensive, but that you ask for feedback and take it well. If they are misinterpreting some piece of your experience or skills, you can share how you actually have that experience. And it really helps you to gauge if you did well or if you need to adjust your interviewing for the next opportunity. So it's something that we definitely recommend folks do. And I absolutely understand how it feels. You start to feel nervous just thinking about asking this question, but it's really key for your learning to get better at interviewing and to understand what people are experiencing when they are talking with you. So a couple of tactical questions that you want to make sure you ask are, how does the interview process work here? So don't leave without knowing what the next steps are. Of course, you will send thank you notes right away, but this answer helps you know when you should follow up about the job status and with whom. So it gives you sort of a sense of, are they looking to close this in 2 weeks, or is this more of a month-long process where what's going to happen? Will there need to be more interviews, or was this sufficient? And then you also just want to ask for everyone that you meet with to get a business card. And, that can feel a little strange when you're in an interview, but trust me, you really want to have everyone's name spelled correctly. You want to be able to send them a thank you note via email, and you just want to be able to keep track of who it was that you talked to and what you discussed. So those are some good questions to ask. And now I'm going to shift a little bit to talking about how to shift the power dynamic, because clearly when you go into an interview, it can feel like the person interviewing you has all of the power. And one of the other ways to really think about shifting the power dynamic is to think about the power that you have and the information that you want to get from that opportunity. So, as I've said, preparation is really the key to feeling confident. So doing all of the research, knowing, being prepared for the questions they're going to ask you, being ready for your questions, like that will go a long way in shifting the dynamic and calming your nerves. But we've also got some additional tips and tricks to help make the interviews, help make you feel much more on an equal footing with the employer. So hopefully these strategies will help you change your perspective and boost your confidence. So again, it's really key to remember that the interviews are a place to determine fit for both parties. So obviously during an interview, the interviewer is looking at how you will fit in within the company, and they're looking at your knowledge, your skills, your personality match with what the company needs. But more importantly, you are also interviewing them to see if they are a good fit for you. And that often gets lost in the power dynamics. So I just want to remind you, right, they have to convince you as well as you convince them. And remember, you were called into the interview, so the company knows they are interested in you. The hiring manager spent a lot of time and resources to select you from many applicants. So you can walk in with confidence knowing that they're at least interested enough to warrant spending, some quality time with you. So then the question becomes, do you want them? You are judging them and whether this is a good fit for you. So having good questions will really help you determine if this is a good fit. But also remembering as you look around, like, is this a place I want to be? Is this really the environment in which I can thrive? So I think that goes a long way to shifting that power dynamic, that you're trying to absorb what they're about and if that's a good place for you to be. So another trick is to ask clarifying questions. So, you want to share who you are, but you want to find out who they are and what their company is about. And when you think about a conversation, right, there's back and forth throughout the entire time. So obviously you're going to have your sort of section of time to ask questions. But as they are asking you questions, if something comes up, if you get a question that you're not prepared for, you can ask for more information. Or ask them to clarify aspects of the question, even if it's not officially your turn to ask questions. So you can say, can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean when you say X? If they use an unfamiliar term, ask for them to clarify it. It buys you time and gives you insight on more on what they really want to know. So you're answering a question that you're actually answering the question that they're asking and not what you how you might be misinterpreting it. So feel free to really have a back and forth and to ask those clarifying questions. So another tip is to pause and breathe. And this may seem absolutely obvious, but breathing is a powerful way to center yourself, collect your thoughts, especially if you start to feel nervous. So you can wait a few breaths to start answering a question, right? If they ask you something, take that inhalation, think about it, and then begin to answer. There's no need to rush. Another trick that I like to talk about with clients is to have a positive affirmation. So mindfulness studies really suggest that positive affirmations can have physiological changes, like they can reduce your stress hormones, they can lower your heart rate and blood pressure. And it may feel silly to repeat something to yourself, but it's much better than the negative self-talk that we fall into very easily, right? Like, it's very easy for us to all speak like, oh, you really blew that, you really messed that up, right? That track can go easily in our brains, but when we try to tell ourselves positive things, it feels silly. So I highly recommend shifting that track to a positive one. And, a psychotherapist suggests using a statement that fits with the interview. So something like, I will absolutely succeed in this job if given the opportunity. My personal favorite is very simple, and it's just a repeat of, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. Psych yourself up say it enough and you will start to believe it. The last tip that we have is really one of my favorites, and it's practice your power pose. And this comes from a researcher named Amy Cuddy, and she shared in a viral TED Talk about posing for 2 minutes in a powerful position can really have a profound effect on how you feel. So in her experiment, she brought people into the lab and tested their testosterone and cortisol, which are the hormone associated with dominance and the hormone associated with stress. Right. Then some people did a high power pose for 2 minutes. So they had their limbs out. They were making as much, space, taking up as much space as possible. And some people did a low power pose where they were sort of hunched over. And you can imagine what it might look like to be on your phone, sitting, waiting for the interview. You would be in a very low power pose. And she found that the high power pose caused a decrease in stress hormones of about 25% and an increase in testosterone of about 19%. So what does this mean for an interview? What I think you really need to do is arrive at your interview, check in with the receptionist, excuse yourself to the restroom, and practice your power pose for 2 minutes. So it's really just about getting your arms up, taking up as much space as possible, and holding that position for 2 minutes. And it may feel absolutely ridiculous, but it works. So you will feel more powerful, you will feel less stressed, and you will feel much more ready to engage on equal footing with your interviewer. So what have we learned today? I know it's been a very quick review of all of the information you need to get ready for an interview and really transform it from an interrogation into a conversation. So remember these key pieces. Invest time in the preparation and research you need to do before the interview. You want to know about the organization, but you also want to do self-reflection on your skills and goals. You want to review common questions that require you to understand what they are asking and answer in ways that address the employer point of view. You want to go through some possible questions for you to ask that will help you differentiate yourself and clarify the role and process. And you want to think about what is that one trick or tip that I'm going to use to shift the power dynamic. How am I going to remember to breathe, or am I going to do the power pose? Like, what's the one? I mean, you can try all of them, but that would probably be overwhelming. So pick one to think, like, this is the one I'm going to hold on to for this interview. And I really do think you will see results. So now it's time for questions for me. I think Stephanie is going to come back and ask them, and if folks have some, they can also type them into the chat.
Sure. So I do have a couple questions from the attendees. The first one is it okay to glance at your notes when you're talking to the interviewer? So if they've asked you a question, is it okay to refer to your notes in front of them?
I think two things are really important about this question. You absolutely want to have notes, and you want to be prepared. Another part of being prepared is coming, with your game face and your supplies. So you want to show up with some way to take notes, and preferably a nice notebook with a pen. Because it is not yet acceptable etiquette, to take notes on your phone, even if that may be how you do it all of the rest of the time. And you want to have, sort of notes ready. And I think it's absolutely acceptable to glance at your notes. Because I think what it shows, right, is that you are prepared and that you do have this information. I wouldn't get caught up with it where this is something that you're paying more attention to than the interviewer, right? So I think there's a balance. But I absolutely think it's fine to glance at your notes, to remind yourself of something, And when you are asking questions, it's absolutely fine to use the question, to have the questions prepared in advance, to have them written down and to take notes as people are sharing their information with you. I think that shows someone who's really engaged. But again, you have to make sure that you are still connecting with the interviewer so that you are looking at them when they're talking and that you're not just looking down and writing everything they say down, right? There's a balance there that's important to note. But yes, come with notes and use them.
Great, thank you. Another good question that we got is, how do you recommend people prepare for phone interviews? Because there's a little bit of a different dynamic there.
Totally. And I think something that's really important about phone interviews is that you prepare for them like a real interview. So do all of your, research and be really ready to have that conversation like we talked about today. Also, make sure that you have a quiet space to do it, that you have a full phone charge, and that you get dressed, right? So, I'm not saying you have to put on your business suit, but don't do a phone interview in your PJs, because you will, you will project differently based on, what you're wearing and sort of how you're put together. So I think all of those pieces are really critical. And then making sure that you, I think particularly because people talk on the phone so much less now, that you practice. So if you have a phone interview coming up, enlist your mom, enlist your best friend, find someone who can ask you some questions on the phone. I mean, one of the things that we do is we always do a mock phone interview, because you want to test that engagement, and how you sound on the phone is really critical to whether people feel like you're engaged or not. So you need to be able to, use different tone and share your excitement in your voice in ways that might be a little different and might feel a lot more exaggerated than you're used to. So I definitely recommend a practice session with someone you trust who will give you some feedback.
Great, thank you. Let's see, there's a quick follow-up on the notes. Do you have to ask permission if you want to take notes?
No, I don't think that's something that you need to ask permission for. I think that you can, if for some reason it feels uncomfortable to you, I think you can tell people that you're going to do that, but I wouldn't ask permission. And so it's a slight differentiation, right? So saying, take out your notebook, take out your pen, say, I'd really like to take notes, is a way of saying, I'm taking charge of this, this part of my interview, and I want to collect this information. I think asking for permission makes it seem much more like, right, it shifts that power dynamic back to the interviewer and saying, can I take notes? You don't have to ask for permission in the workplace to take notes, right? So I wouldn't ask for it in an interview. I would just say, this is something I'm going to do. And then if for some reason they have a problem with it, it invites them to give you some feedback about it without making it about asking permission.
Okay, great. Another good question that we got is, what's the best way to recover if you go blank? If they ask you a question and you just blank out?
Yeah, and trust me, I have great empathy for this because I have been there. And I think you want to breathe. If you have a positive affirmation, hopefully that is what is coming into your mind. I can do this, I can do this. And you want to acknowledge it and move on, right? So, for example, if you could ask a question and you're sort of, can't think of anything to say, you want to say, I'm having a hard time really thinking of a specific answer to that, and then launch into another answer. So one of the tricks about this is that if you have some things that are you're really ready for, and they ask you, tell me about a time, in the last year when you made a mistake. Well, it might be hard to remember a specific time in the last year, but if you've thought about and have ready a mistake story or a failure story, what you can say is, if you're blank on, an exact answer to the question they're asking, you can frame the answer and move it in another direction. So you can say, I'm struggling to think of an exact example from this year, but let me tell you about this other time when, and go into that story. So that's another time, like when you go blank, having some stories behind you to sort of go into automatic pilot on is really helpful. But again, I want you to acknowledge that you either can't think of an exact example or that you're struggling to think of something, but then move on. Don't apologize. Don't apologize profusely. Just keep going.
Great, thank you. Another good question that we just got is it okay to ask questions during the interview instead of just saving them all up for the end of the interview?
Yes, absolutely. And that's what I was talking about in the ask clarifying questions. So it's, and that's a real mark of a conversation, right, is the back and forth. So it's absolutely okay to ask questions. You don't want to ask so many that the interviewer feels like they're not getting their questions answered, right? So, but again, if they have a question that you're not quite sure you understand, you can ask the clarifying question. Or if they ask you a question that really prompts something that you're curious about, feel free to ask it back. So like if they ask you, using the example that I had in questions to ask, right? If you have this question about what's going to happen with this recent acquisition that they've made, and they bring up something about, integrating teams, it's totally fine to say, yeah, I noticed that you just acquired that company. How is that integration going here? So you can ask a question that's connected to a question that they've asked you. And that, I think, as long as they're good questions, right, that are engaging the interviewer, so you have to sort of monitor the interviewer's response, right? Are they giving you good answers? Does it feel like you're in a flow of a conversation? Then it's absolutely fine. If you're starting to feel like the interview is a little stiff or it's not quite, you're starting to get a vibe that that's not what they want you to be doing, then stop. But I think it's absolutely good, and you will know if you're in a flow of a conversation, and that is a really great interview.
Okay, great, thank you. Our next question is, when you're trying to shift the power dynamics, how often should you do that? And is there any specific point in the interview when it's better to do that or not?
So I think, a great example of shifting the power dynamic is to ask questions before you sort of have permission or it's officially your turn. So I definitely think my previous answer helps inform that. And I think it's not about, shifting the power dynamic is not about sort of the other person feeling like they don't have power, like you don't want to sort of take away power from the interviewer, but what you want to do is make sure that you feel confident, and that you are able to express that confidence. So a lot of those tricks and tips are about taking away your nervousness. So whenever you need to do that, so if you start to feel nervous during the middle of an interview and you need to sort of pause and take a breath, you don't want to make a big production about it and say, I'm pausing and taking a breath now, right? But you do want to use the tools use those tools that I offered you to help you feel confident and that you're on equal footing with the interviewer. So, I think there are times within the interview that you will need those tools to sort of pause or to have your positive affirmation going. But I don't think it's about, there's a particular point in every interview where you need to do, X. It's really about feeling prepared and feeling confident in removing your nervousness.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question is, how do you ask about salary, or how do you respond if the interview is asking you about your salary expectations?
Right. So this is another place where you want to be prepared. And, we have a whole framework about negotiation, but the essentials are, if you want to be prepared with a salary range if they ask you about salary expectations, and you want that range to be informed based on your research. So salary.com, glassdoor.com, the vault, like wherever you have access to, you want to get that information, and you want to also try to verify that with real life people who, actually do the job. So that's part of it. The other part is that you don't want it. So that's if they ask you, right? If they initiate a salary conversation during the interview, you want to be ready and you want to have a range that you can talk about. If you're really curious about salary and want to talk salary, you do not want to bring that up in an initial interview. Where you want to be when you talk about salary. So if they haven't brought it up, you want to be in the most powerful place that you can be to talk about salary, and that's after they've already offered you the job, right? Anytime before then, they still have a ton of leverage. But once they've offered you the job, they've really signaled they want you. That's the point where you have the most leverage. And so you don't have to wait for a written offer letter. If they've made a verbal offer, then it's absolutely the time to start talking about salary and to, ask, what is, what are the salary, what are the salary opportunities here? But the other piece to remember, and I think this is often hard for folks who particularly are transitioning into their first job to remember, that benefits are not just about salary. It's salary, it's vacation, it's health insurance. It's a whole number of things. So you want to really do your research there and make sure you understand what the package is that you're looking at and what the trade-offs are that you care about the most.
Great, thank you. And we'll just do one final question, which is about internships. I mean, should you use the same approach if you're interviewing for an internship, or is there anything that you would recommend they do differently?
I think that most of these things absolutely hold for internships. The way that internships are structured now is, they're really looking for someone who can come in and contribute from day one. So you want to signal your ability to do that, and one of the most important ways you can do that is by preparing for the interview. So, doing the personal reflection work, doing the research on the company, being ready with some, common answers and ways to talk about yourself, and then having good questions for them. All of those apply. And then, of course, you want to be as confident and as not nervous as possible. So I think some of these using some of these tips and tricks, that was really hard to say. Tips and tricks are really key as well. So, I think all of this applies to internships. And if you are doing internships, one of the most important things I would say to remember for future interviews is to write down the interesting things that are happening to you so that you have some good stories to share for future employers.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Courtney. This has been really a great learning opportunity, I think, for all of us. I want to thank everybody for joining today. If you're interested, Courtney at Fundamentum is offering a free initial consultation So you can talk to her one-on-one and ask some of your specific questions. You can connect with her by going to her website. It's www.fundamentum, fundamentum.com, or you can also send her an email. The email address is hello@fundamentum.com. Also, if you haven't done so yet, please go to AfterCollege.com and set up your job seeker profile. We have a lot of great employers who are looking to hire entry-level, recent college graduates, and even for people that have 2 to 4 or 5 years of experience. So if you set up a profile on AfterCollege.com, it'll be a lot easier for them to find you and invite you to come interview. The last thing is I just want to let you know that next week we're doing another webinar on how to develop your personal brand with Courtney at Fundamentum. So we can take the conversation on that to the next level next week. In the chat area of the GoToWebinar control panel, I've actually posted a link where you can register for the webinar that we're going to be doing next Wednesday. I'm also going to be posting this to the After College Facebook page. So if you want to go there to click on the link and register, you can do that as well. So thanks again, everybody, for attending today. This concludes the webinar, and I hope you all have a great day and the best of luck to all of you in your job search and your interviews. Thank you so much.